Hi, Neil Lazarus here. The other day I was driving and in the middle of the road, in the middle of nowhere, there was a camel blocking the road. I waited for about 5 minutes, and then after about 5 minutes, Bedouin, one of the nomads from the desert, came and took his camel and moved him from the centre of the road. For me, what was so funny was the guy didn't even realise that there was a traffic jam because he was so busy looking on his iPhone. That's what I want to talk to you about today, which is a country, Israel, which on the one hand you see things which haven't changed since the time of the Bible, thousands of years old, yet at the same time we have become a startup nation. A country whose natural produce is not oil. You know, there's that joke the Jews don't like Moses because we spent a generation walking around the wilderness to get to the only place in the Middle East that doesn't have oil. We got gas, but that's another story. Where we don't have oil, we have the ability not only to create startups, but also to export them. What I'm going to suggest to you today is why we have become a startup nation, but not only become a startup nation, become an ecosystem for it. Producing, creating an environment where they can be produced, and thirdly, exporting them. We have now got startups to go. People buy. Now, excuse me, when I say buy Israeli products and startups, I'm being a little bit modest. Let me give you a few examples. We have the ICQ company being sold at $287 million. You have Mobily, which is being sold at $15.3 billion. Waze, $1.1 billion. So you have these companies which are being exported at a ridiculously huge price. It's becoming a major part of the Israeli economy. The products, I've got lists here of what Israel has created. We don't have time. This is a very short presentation. But just to name a few, I mean, remember your phones, the earlier phones which flipped open? Created in Israel, the flip-top cell phone. Flash drives, we still use those. Flash drives were invented in Israel. The chip in your iPad, invented in Israel. So what we're seeing is that Israel has an amazing creativity and an amazing ability to produce, innovate, and export that innovation. The question which I want to ask, and we'll see in a couple of seconds, is why. By the way, creating startups is not the only product that we have here in that field. For example, and when we talk about startups, I'm talking about from agriculture to science to medicine, so on and so forth. We also have the ability of human resources, the H&R development. You have 300 R&D centers in Israel, and it's no wonder that Google and Intel are using those as resources themselves. In fact, Israel was placed 5th on the Bloomberg Most Innovative Country list. Not bad for a little country with only 9 million people. Look, there's many countries out there which have tried to attract technology, which have tried to attract people to come and invest. I'll give you an example, Dubai. In Dubai, there's tax breaks, etc., to invest. Israel's got something better. Israel produces something better. Israel has a secret, which means that it doesn't necessarily have to provide just tax breaks to attract big companies. And those are what I'm going to be calling today the 6 pillars of the startup nation. Let's have a look at number 1. Pillar number 1, if you like. I would argue that pillar number 1 is the ability to think out of the box. It's in the very DNA of Israel. It may have even come from the beginning, right at the beginning of the War of Independence. Look, I'll give you an example. Imagine the scene, War of Independence. Jerusalem is blocked off. There's fighting around the city. No one can get in. So you would imagine the number one thing is to ram it, send the troops in, fight to the bitter end. Israel did something else, and I think it's indicative of the way we think. Rather than just ram through the blockade, Israel built the Israelis, what would be the Israelis, created an alternative road, what's called the Burma Road. That Burma mentality, if you like, of if there's no such thing as a problem, there's only a challenge, I think is really important. And I think that idea, number one, of the ability to think out of the box is a crucial part of where and why we've become so important as a startup nation. Number two, I would argue, is taking the simple idea and producing a product from it. I'll give you an example. I remind you, Israel's in a desert. We are a desert country. It gets very hot here. So take something as simple as a burst pipe or a dripping pipe that just drips and drips and drips and needs to be fixed. Every house has got one. And take something from it. And what that actually is the basis of what was developed here, which is called drip irrigation. Drip irrigation is, rather than putting sprinklers on, we don't have enough water to do that, is sending a pipe with a small drip and using it as irrigation. Without exaggeration, you go from Jerusalem today and drive to the southernmost furthest point of Israel, Eilat. You drive through the desert, and from that desert you will see farms in a desert. It blows my mind every time I see it. And what are they basing their ability to grow products on? Is drip irrigation, not sprinklers. Drip, drip, based on that idea of a broken pipe many years ago. Number two, taking the simple, making it more complicated. If the ability to think out of the box is an important element of the characteristics of Israelis or the culture of Israelis, I would argue for number three that there's something else, which is literally talent. Literally talent. What do I mean by that? Is this idea of Israelis are remarkably educated as a people. You see, number four, which I would say is demography, is important, all right? But you've got to have talent combined with demography. What do I mean? Give you an example. Israelis are educated. About 47% of those over the age of 25 have a college degree. You have Ben Gurion University, Hebrew University, Tel Aviv University. That's all. We're up there intellectually. At the same time, number four, demographics, if you like, is it's not enough to have a lot of people. You've got to have the right type of people. Japan has what? I think it's like 126 million people. Okay? But they're mainly old. In Israel, the population is generally younger. Not only is it generally younger, we've got a really big secret, which many countries could learn. Immigration is good for the economy. It's not bad for it. What we learned was that through immigration, you actually get new resources. Immigration, people, demography, if you like, is a natural resource which feeds into the upstart nation. So, for example, during the immigration, or what we call aliyah, coming upwards of immigrants from the former Soviet Union, we had thousands upon thousands of scientists coming in, engineers coming in. Today the numbers are outrageously wild. For example, there are 140 scientists, technicians and engineers for every 10,000 Israelis. Compare that to 85 for the United States. It's not just we've got talent, demography, but the right type of demography combined together. Number five, I would argue, is culture. What's the culture of the country got to do with being an upstart nation? Let me explain. Central to Israeli culture, and I don't think it's a stereotype, maybe a generalization, is what we call in Hebrew chutzpah. What's chutzpah? It's roughly translated as cheek, goal, the ability to do it. Even if it's not 100% accepted, if it's not socially accepted, people do it anyway. Best example I can give you is this. When you wait in a line in Israel. Now, There are cultures that line. Britain is one of them, or queue up. Okay. There are countries which push. The Italians. In Israel, what happens if there's a line of people? They push. We're in the Mediterranean, but not only will they push, they will create 3 other lines that come around. You'll suddenly start to talk to someone on your right, and behind them's another line. You talk to them on the other side, and there's another line. Actually, where there was one line where you were at the front, there's 2 coming in on each direction. We drive like that as well. But there's something about that which I think is interesting. That impatience, that ability to get forward, that sense of we don't have time, that chutzpah is an important part of an ability to be who we are today. It's a willingness not only to break rules in order to create, but it's a willingness also to fail. It sounds a little abstract, but let me explain. You don't learn to walk unless you fall down. But in many countries, failure is often punished. Look, I grew up in the UK. In the UK, you were disciplined for not getting the right results. That was the education I had. An education and a culture which inspires failure as the process of trying, I think is something which is really quite interesting. And again, think about that example I gave you of how does your country line up? How is failure treated? Are you allowed to fail? Are you allowed to experiment? And you know what? This may not work, but from that experiment, a better idea may come. From that failure, a better idea may come. And I think that that's the culture, if you like, within the startup nation. One example of that I can give you is in 1997. Dr. Amit Goffer, who was a successful inventor, was in an accident. He was left as a quadriplegic, nothing from the bottom down. What ended up from a tragic accident was the creation of what is called today Rewalk. Rewalk is powered wearable skeletons that are literally attached to the body, and people walk again. Taking the tragedy, taking the failure, taking the what happened, and creating something from it. That, I think, is a secret element that we have today in the startup nation of Israel. Now, there's one last element which I think is important, which is number 6, which is the army. Now, Israel has a powerful army in the Middle East. We have to. Throughout the ages, Israel has been threatened with destruction, and even until today, we see that. But within the army, within compulsory army conscription, where an 18-year-old until age 21 has to go into the army, something within the culture is created which is beneficial towards upstart nation. First of all, someone from age 18 is dealing with life and death situations. It creates a maturity. They work in a group. They work in a team. They work in making decisions very quickly and important decisions quickly. That mentality, that leadership skill is exported to the work market afterwards. Also, let's not deny it, you also have in the army some really good hackers. You also have programmers. You also have engineers. The threats that Israel has faced has created the necessity to create defense mechanisms. That ability to create, given new circumstance, that ingenuity, that leadership, that working within a group is an important pillar, number 6, of what it is to be a startup nation. What we've seen is, at the end of the day, it's not just about tax breaks. That's not the secret of being an upstart nation. It's not even about a government creating an environment which is conducive to business. Most people can do that. Within Israel, there's something much deeper. And what I've tried to suggest today is it's not just one factor. There's so many factors that have played a part in Israel's development as a startup nation. Whether it's innovation because we needed to survive, whether it's part of that Israeli or Jewish culture. Again, Jewish culture is based on I say something, you ask me a question, I say something back and ask you a question. That continuing sense of pushing the limits of understanding. Maybe it's part of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, that army service that we spoke about. All of that are coming together with a little bit of chutzpah to create an ideal place for a startup nation to grow. But what is clear, that however much countries hand out money or create tax brackets, innovation will only occur at the level of the individual. Plant the seed and it will grow. That's what we discovered in the desert called Israel, the upstart nation. Thank you.